1656 until 1935. Now, I'm not sure if the division took that length of time to heal, or whether they just thought, shall we leave it as it is, and maybe we'll get back to changing the building back. Now, this was at a time of religious troubles in Scotland. And just to get back to the wall for a second, can you imagine if this half, you lot over there, fell on with this lot over here, maybe tea, coffee, whatever, maybe the choice of music or something, and you just decided, well, I'm really not going to sit and pray and worship with that lot again. And you build a wall dividing east to west. Have a look at each other and think, yeah, I'm beginning to think in that way already. Well, essentially, there were a whole lot of different issues attached, but that's what happened, except I'm not sure in our church which is north and which is south here in All Souls. But in the church in Holyrood, it was east-west, and fortunately, east was one half of the church and west was the other. So they would have picked two pillars, say like the center pillars, and they would have built a wall right across that way, making a clear division of two sort of square places of worship, rather than it would have been quite difficult, a wall right down the center. Well, we have lots of walls in Belfast, another one wouldn't matter that much. And even the town council of Stirling, who tried to reconcile them on various separate occasions, failed. And the end result was the town council even agreed to have an east congregation and a west congregation. So in Stirling, if you're a member of Holyrood, people would say, are you the east congregation or the west congregation in that particular church? Reverend James Guthrie, who I read a little bit about later on, it states that he split the congregation and he refused to work with the more moderate colleagues. As a matter of fact, I noticed in Holyrood Church, he was described as a troublesome fella, extreme and a bigoted Presbyterian. That was the description of him. It's an extreme and bigoted Presbyterian, Reverend James Guthrie. And I thought about that. I thought, I wonder how fair this is. So later on, I discovered there was the Smith Museum. And I took myself there to see if they had anything on Guthrie, the man responsible for this terrible disturbance in dividing a church, a beautiful church, into two separate congregations. The man responsible turned out to be somewhat different. Reverend James Guthrie, I believe, was one of the most important church ministers in Scottish history. He believed the king was only the king because he was in covenant with the people. In covenant with the people. He was a covenanter. And let's just think about that for a moment. The king described himself as absolute. And this man was saying, no, you're not absolute. You're actually, yes, you're our king, but you're here by the will of the people. And if you must be in covenant with the people. This was, as far as the king was concerned, was treason. He was the king. He was the king. And just like everyone else, he was a subject of Jesus Christ. That might not resonate necessarily with us today, but that was an extremely radical position to take. So you can see why some people thought he was extreme. That was an extreme radical position to say, you're no different than the rest of us. You're just a subject of Jesus Christ. You may be our king, but you're in covenant with us. But at the end of the day, you're a man like the rest of us. But the king was outraged by Guthrie. As he believed, as I said, he believed, I rule by divine right. And sadly for Reverend Guthrie, the king was none other than Charles II, whose father, Charles I, had been executed in 1649 by Oliver Cromwell. In my opinion, and it's my opinion, Guthrie was the bravest of the brave. And at the end, he preached a sermon calmly from the scaffold before his execution in 1661. He actually preached from the gallows. Now, I don't know as yet what aspects of theological thinking I might share with Guthrie. I might find I would differ with numerous things with him. After all, he lived in the 1600s and I live in the 21st century. A lot of time has passed, a lot of ideas have changed, lots of ways of thinking about religion, thinking about God, thinking about our approach to faith have changed dramatically. So it's unfair to judge him by what I believe now, or any of us believe. So I'm not terribly interested in whether his position was a strict theological position. Whether he was a literist, I don't know. He was a highly educated man and a very brave man. And he firmly believed that the king did not hold absolute authority over him or the people he preached to. When I think of people like Guthrie, I think of it in this way. He created a pathway for us, for all of us, to act according to the rights of individual conscience. Cromwell described him after a meeting he had with Cromwell. Cromwell described him as the short man who would not bow. He would not bow to anyone. He would not bend the knee to anyone. And one example of this, during the times of Charles I, he attempted, Charles I, to introduce episcopal forms of church government. And there is the Episcopal Church of Scotland, not to be confused, although it's an Anglican tradition, it's not the same church as the Church of England or the Church of Ireland. It is a separate church, but in communion with the Anglican tradition. And the king wanted to introduce episcopal forms of church government. That was not going to sit comfortable with Presbyterians, who are a flat organization and a moderator stays for a year or 2 years or so, and that's it. And most certainly Guthrie was not going to have that imposed on him. He opposed that, and he won on that. These people, Guthrie and his like, over the centuries, were the pioneers of dissent and religious freedom. So when we sit here in any of our churches, or indeed in any churches, doesn't matter what denomination, and people think, or people know, that they have religious freedom, the freedom to act according to your own conscience, the freedom to see your own personal relationship with God, however you may describe that, and not have some state church from a king with absolute authority, or any leader, and we have many of those in the world today, who impose religious intolerance on their people. That it was people like Guthrie that set the pathway for us and paid the penalty with his life. Amen.